Hello, Erin Spink of Spinktank. Welcome to Priceless Advice for Leaders and Volunteers. And I'm so delighted to see you. We haven't seen each other in person in way too long, even before the
Yeah.
pandemic times. And, when we get together, shenanigans occur.
And sometimes there's legal charges, but we're not gonna we
Not
put
going to
that
worry about
behind us,
that.
so it's all good.
And we're not going to worry about that right now.
We're in
It's,
international waters now, so we can
exactly.
do and say anything.
Zoom counts as international waters, and maritime law does not apply to Zoom. It's so odd to have like such close friends and colleagues like yourself and Jared McCandless, another one, where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, we can talk in this manner, and we did that a lot before, but somehow it feels
Yeah.
further away. It feels further away because it's not like, oh, in June or July at a
Yeah, we're gonna
conference
be hanging out,
we're gonna be
singing
hanging out singing
singing
karaoke.
karaoke in a bar one night. Yeah.
Yeah, probably the night before the earliest morning we all have to wake up, just all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I don't
But
remember that night, so I don't remember how late it was.
there's
So
there's
yeah.
no comment because time has no meaning, and that's what we've learned in the last year and a half or so. Time has no meaning. Time is a construct. It's an illusion. But I'm glad to have this time with you. And
Me
as much
too.
as you and I automatically make each other laugh and smile and giggle and be delighted, we are actually going to get into
Yeah.
serious advice, like real
Yes.
things that, as leaders of volunteers and volunteer engagement professionals and managers, that are helpful, and some challenges we've had in the last, not just the last year, but in general. So, one of the things that you are famous for is your ebook, um, and at the end of 2019, you very psychically published the top 20 trends of 2020, or top 20 ideas. I'm going to mix it
Yeah.
up, even though I have a chapter in it. And
Yeah.
a lot of that turned out to be true throughout the pandemic, that
Yeah.
technology was more important, and kind of gamification and engagement
Yeah.
and
Yeah. A
diversity,
lot of the DEI stuff, there's
D
actually two
exactly,
chapters on
FISA and others.
equity and
Yep.
inclusion. Yeah.
Yep, yep. And so what are the lottery numbers, and
Yeah.
can we split the winnings?
Well, I'm playing them tonight, so I'll let
Okay,
you know if how
how'd that go?
prescient my 8 ball is.
Shake, shake,
But
shake, shake,
yeah.
shake, shake, shake.
Well, and I think it's really an interesting commentary because as much as we like to think that this has been an exceptional year, and it has in so many ways, but it's one of the things that I'm hoping we can dive into is like there's a lot of stuff that doesn't change, and I
Mhm,
think for me what the pandemic has really done is just exposed things more starkly,
mhm.
um in like a black and white photo where you're like, oh whoa, I didn't notice that shadow so much before when it was in color. So yeah, yeah, I'm hoping to dive into that with you because I know we both love getting into the nitty gritty of things.
And tech and data management and all
Yeah.
of that kind of stuff. And I think that's the thing that I've been speaking the most about, is how we can better use the tech that agencies already have, like
Yep.
digging into that. And then I absolutely hand off the spotlight and the microphone for data management's been more important than ever, as things
Yeah.
shut down and start up and shut down and start up, and people come and go.
Yeah.
And yeah, dive on into what's been exactly the same or exposed as needing more attention, and what are some changes that we can take from how we've adapted and kind of carry that into 2021, whether there's an ebook about it or not.
Yeah. But I think we sometimes put the cart before the horse almost. Data, technology, they're not the point, right? They're the tool. They're how we get to the point. They make our lives easier. They are supposed to enrich relationships, not they're not the point. The relationships are the point. And I think sometimes we forget about that, and sometimes we get a little concerned with the wrong things. And people were always thinking about, oh, well, what's the latest app? What's this and what's that? And those are all good things if they add value, and if they're helping to enhance our practice. But it's not about having the latest, app, or despite, like, your great chapter on gamification. Gamification is about the engagement, right?
Right.
It's about connecting with people, providing content in a way that's meaningful to them. It's not about, spending 17 hours on your phone playing whatever people play, those jewel games. I don't even have them because they're addictive.
Yeah.
But I would say, like, it's been important, but because it's a tool, it's a way that's allowed us to keep in contact with people. It's a way that's allowed us to create contact between people. So technology is really, it's the road. It's not, it's not the destination.
Exactly. And also it depends on, do have the right tool for the job. So an example or a simile or a metaphor that I like to use is, very often the newest app or the newest startup in any sector, but our sector isn't immune. And you and I know the founders and leaders of most VMS companies, and they're fantastic people, and they're very
Yeah.
into customer feedback. But in general, the 21st century of technology is people, and I get these calls all the time, and I'm sure you do,
Yeah.
like, I have a new app for volunteer recruitment. I have a new app
Yeah.
for volunteer engagement. I have this new VMS.
Yeah.
And because it's a business, and these are for-profit companies typically,
Yeah.
not always, but typically, they're always trying to sell you a Tesla or a Lamborghini. And you're like, genuinely, most organizations need like Subarus and Hondas
Yeah.
that just run forever and do
Yeah.
basic things, and you can, customize them a little bit if you need to.
Yeah.
And some organizations aren't capable of doing anything, or the best tool for what they're doing is a horse or a bicycle.
Yeah.
Super,
Absolutely. Yeah.
super simple, low cost or no cost systems with things like, um, free services. Like plenty of organizations do just fine with, and Google is not ideal, but like plenty of organizations do just fine using the Google suite of stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, it's very symptomatic of some bigger, trends, and I would say issues within the field and within the sector, is that, we focus on the sparkly dangly kind of things. But also there's this, I think a lot of people, what I find is a lot of people who come to us with these bells and whistles, unlike those that have been in the field and been supporting the field for many years, they don't really take the time to truly get to know what's out there, what the
Mhm.
landscape is. They don't do their homework, and they're really not integrated, right? Like,
Right.
they just kind of parachute in, think, oh wow, yeah, blue ocean, great, I'm gonna do this. Like it's the first time we've ever seen a site for posting volunteer opportunities. And
Right.
if only there was one site that everybody posted on.
It's like,
um you know
okay, back of the
yeah.
line, bud. Yeah, that's well done,
Yeah.
buddy. Yeah, it's like there's plenty out there, and you and I and other leaders, Rob and
Mhm.
Faiza and Meridian and Elisa, always talking about, like, let's not reinvent that wheel. Let's not
Yeah.
try to make a better mousetrap. Let's improve upon the tech and the systems and the best, and take a really good, honest look at best practices. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
equitable? Is that accessible? Or is that,
Yep.
held? Is that a way of doing things established 50 years ago by a certain demographic of people that are the
Yeah.
classic representatives of the sector? And that's neither good nor bad, but it has to be examined with a
Absolutely.
neutral, critical lens.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like, I think, um and for me, like, a lot of the a lot of the questions, a lot of the conversations that I see and hear, they're about variations on a theme. You know, they're
Mm-hmm.
really not about what I would say like, yeah, like are those kind of, you know, existential or
Right.
really transformational
Yeah.
topics.
Yeah.
And you know, and we can get really focused on that minutia piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, it comes from a place of comfort. It comes from a place of getting pressure from, you know, up above. You know, but it's really not actually meaningful, right? It's not the
Mm-hmm.
stuff that actually drives the bus. It's not the stuff that makes a big difference at the end of
Mm-hmm.
the day.
Yeah, and if
Yeah.
someone comes along with a new app, and again, I've sometimes gotten emailed an NDA before a contract and then said we have to have a very secret conversation, and it's literally everything I've heard in the last 15 years over and over again, and
Yeah.
they think it's some like giant
Yeah.
tech secret. And I've had like NDAs with clients where like I'm not even sure, like someone's calling me from Europe and they won't say who they are, and I have this NDA that I had to sign by email before we had this phone call, and then mysteriously, I'm not saying these things are connected, hashtag conspiracy theory, mysteriously 2 years later, an app in UK is a disaster because
Yeah. Yeah.
during the it was
Where did that come from?
like there's tens of thousands of people trying to sign up, and there's like 500 opportunities. It's like, well, if that was part of that 45-minute conversation I had a few years ago when someone thought they had the next big thing and they were calling from Europe, like maybe,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's unrelated, but it's a lot of I talk myself out of so much work. I have the conversation with people where they explain their project and, you know, whether
Yeah.
like, can I consult, can I retain? And I was like, quite frankly, you're not doing anything that's new or better or interesting, and I'm going to give you
Yeah.
some free honest advice rather than paying for a bunch down the line and being frustrated in 6 months or a year when your app flops. That
Yeah.
yeah, there's no, the market won't sustain this. There isn't enough money, there isn't any interest. And the thing that I say most often is, if a volunteer coordinator who's a department of one has to learn anything new with a steep learning
Yeah.
curve, or input a bunch of data, like copy over a bunch of data, like
Yeah.
they are just not going to. There isn't the
No, no,
time,
and
and there isn't the
so
interest,
where's
and
the
there isn't the
value?
need. Yeah, so where
Yeah,
there's no
and the
value.
value,
There's
right?
no
Like,
value.
and the value
Yeah.
to whom, right?
Yeah.
Sure, it's value to you guys if you're
And your
selling this, but
investors, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
With
but
them, what's in it for
no,
me? With them, nothing.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
I've talked myself out of a lot of work that way in the last couple of years, but I'd rather do that and then work with tech companies who are doing things correctly by refining and responding to customer feedback
yeah,
in VMS, and being having really great integrity and transparency about the value to the organization. Like
yeah,
that's
yeah,
who I work with, you know, as clients. And it's also a huge thing, I think, you know, culturally in North America, to be like the first adopter of a technology and a this and a
yeah.
that. And that
There's a shine to
also,
that, isn't there? Yeah,
that shiny object
yeah,
factor,
yeah,
and without getting the buy-in, like maybe someone else higher up in the organization is like, hey, I got a really great sales pitch about such and such. And it could even be like accounting software. It doesn't have to be VMS, but the
yeah,
people who are going to use it every day, the staff and the paid employees and volunteers, are like, I had nothing to do with that decision of why we got
yeah,
XYZ VMS, or
yeah,
why we got this accounting software, or this, you know, um, project management software. Like, I had nothing to do with that conversation, and I have, you know, no time or interest to learn this whole new widget
yeah. Thing, yeah,
thing.
yeah. Adam Grant really talks a lot about that in Originals, right? Like where it's you know, like yes, there's this kind of like fine line between early adopters and actually like second gen kind of adoption and stuff like that. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, I think we overcomplicate things, right? Like it's not about more and more and more, right? And I don't think that's unique certainly to the profession. Like I think it's a like a global phenomenon of just, you know, the cult of busyness and just more and more and more, and really, you know, just to to kind of pull it back to the whole data and
Mm-hmm.
tech and kind of thing, it's really about tools should be there to simplify.
Right.
Tools should be there to expand our capacity to focus on the things that matter, not to create more busy work or a whole new, set of work.
What do you think is going to stick around in 2021 from the tech and communication and just changes overall that you've witnessed in our sector?
Well, I mean, I think tech is going to become an even more critical tool. I think people are, I mean, let's be honest, we're far from seeing the end of this and the
Mhm.
ripple effects of this. Even if I know you've been jabbed. We're still, a lot of us are still waiting here in Canada, but the ripple effects are going to go on for some time. And I also think that a lot of organizations we've seen have completely restructured. They've
Yep.
changed what they do. They've changed how they do it. And I don't think, it's a lot of people just kept saying, like, well, let's get back to normal. Well, no, like that switch is gone, right? There is no normal to go back to. This is the now, this is the reality we're living in.
Mhm.
So I certainly think data technology, to all of those kinds of cloud-based softwares are going to continue to be hyper important, but more so because of the changes to our organizations, to our communities, to our profession, in terms of, many of us were furloughed, reassigned to different areas. The volunteer opportunities that we have changed. We just don't, we have less capacity with our organizations in general, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's going to continue to be a really pressing thing. I think what we need to make sure that we're bringing forward in this conversation are some really critical questions around, is this actually, are we actually using these tools for good? Are they helping us to move towards achieving our mission, or are they actually creating further divisions, which the pandemic has just highlighted, and further inequities and and just discrepancies in terms of access and opportunities, and just creating more isolation and pockets of just I mean, we already have seen challenges to our levels of community engagement, with volunteering being like one of those pillars. We've also seen, I think the other thing about tech that I think is really interesting is, we've seen the rise of caremongering
Right.
again,
Yeah.
which, is wonderful and great things. And so when you were talking about like that lone volunteer
Mhm.
coordinator, imagine that with, I don't know what the stats are in the US, but in Canada, I think it's like 60, oh no, I think it's actually more than that, like 60 to 75%, if not up to 80% of the nonprofits and charities in my country are actually completely volunteer led,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And so we see, I think tools can be really powerful for self-organizing groups, like community affiliation groups. Um, but again, like, they need to be actually supporting things, and they need to be used, like you were saying earlier, like we don't want to come in with a mallet when what we actually need is a laser,
Mhm.
right? So tools and technology have to come with the context and the knowledge, right? So, sure, you can just have random people signing up to, drive seniors or vulnerable people in your community to appointments. That's a wonderful thing. But if you're not including some of the basic checks and balances, like, criminal reference checks, or there's
Yep.
basic screenings, and, so again, there's limitations to these tools if you don't have that context. And I think, and also, even for us that have that context, asking really critical questions. Am I excluding people
Mhm.
by
Yeah.
saying that I only have an online application form? Am I
Right.
excluding people by saying, well, you must, do X, Y, and Z in terms of screening, in order to fit this role, right?
Yeah.
So
Or do
yeah,
12 weeks of intensive
yeah,
classes and pass a background check. And it's
yeah,
like, who's got time for that anymore? And that's still, a major component to a lot of training
yep,
systems. And like you said, it's that balance of how are
yeah,
we using the tools in the toolbox. And, I've got a webinar and workshop series. It's high tech, high touch that I'm
yes,
always up. Every time I do it, I update it because everything
yeah,
is that's changing all the time of how can you
yeah,
use the tools in your toolbox to deepen the relationships,
yeah,
all the definitions of engagement from the crass tech eyeballs and advert and amount of time spent on the app doing the thing
yeah,
versus
yeah,
like, oh, deep relationship, whether that's someone connecting to the mission in 5 minutes with something like Be My Eyes app, and that's
yeah,
super micro volunteering, remote volunteering versus you know the docent that's been at the Getty Museum for 50 years
yeah.
and still has a lot to learn and has a lot to teach people.
We have all these, of course, all these great but sometimes trite sayings about the value of one, the power of many, and yet
Right.
we don't actually explore that power. We don't, we don't always feel the weight, and we
Mhm.
also don't carry the weight, I think.
Mhm. Yeah.
um, and I think by becoming more uncomfortable, it's going to lead to, like I said, more innovation. It's going to lead to better advocacy. It's going to lead to a stronger profession because we have more voices, and a more nuanced
Mhm.
set of voices that can speak to a multitude of experiences, right? Because
Right.
when one of our challenges over the years has been we can never come to agreement on the definition of things because there's so much diversity in terms of, you've worked with, parks and recreation, which is
Mhm.
totally different than me working in national, health charities, right?
Right. Yeah.
And yet so much of what we do is truly, when you bring it down to brass tacks, when you really distill it down, it's about providing opportunities to engage the community,
Mhm.
in bettering the world, right?
Yeah.
Ideally. Now, there's a whole question about better for whom,
Right.
that Rob and
What
I,
and what harm? Yeah, exactly. Like your
yeah,
conversation with Rob, and actually by the time this airs, my conversation with Brianna that I just recorded yesterday. That's about, and her whole work with connecting the cause is uh, recognizing again that emotionally neutral perspective and just having to be
yeah,
really really honest and transparent. It's like, what harm has our
yeah,
agency caused either to our clients and constituents
yeah,
or the community in general, and that's
yeah,
a real serious point of discomfort that especially I think in because so much of our sector, and I also had this conversation with someone completely different this week where they're like, well, this volunteer program was established 50 years ago by the ladies who lunch, the
yeah,
socialites, and because it's
yeah,
a volunteer meeting, you only have one martini with lunch, and then you go and you do the thing. But that idea that
yeah,
how the sector has evolved or was founded 100 years ago or 50 years ago in
yeah.
Western colonial culture, like there's those levels of it that doesn't mean that we're incapable of change. And again,
No, it
like,
behooves us to change, actually.
and
I
and
would
and
say,
and we must,
yeah,
it's adapt or perish, and it's also really critical to, I feel like my whole career has been not just in conservation, but just kind of breaking down silos and fragmented little islands of thought where it's like when you actually all talk to each other, we agree we do have these shared goals with this
yeah,
mission. It just gets down to whose agenda of how we get there and how is that unconsciously biased and
yeah,
informed and tilted from a limited perspective. We'll put it that
yeah,
way. And I had some of my very formative childhood years growing up on Oahu in Hawaii as like the only white kid for miles around,
yeah,
other than my cousins and my sister. Like that, I was the haole on the block, and that was an extremely valuable experience because it
yeah,
didn't make me hostile to other people. It's like, okay, I get that discomfort. I get what that otherness feels like, and it's still I can step right back into other pieces of society and not have the barrier of skin color and be right back to a place of privilege that was different from, a few years when I was, 9 or 10 or 12 years old. And I've also, had recent conversations with folks who talk about the trend of female or female identified people in the sector that goes to that scarcity mindset that we are kind of
Mhm.
touching upon earlier
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
it's that way because it's in this cycle of it pays so little, and women
Often done on the side of desks.
dawn
It's
on the side of desks, and women, especially the ladies who lunch, like there is a partner in the relationship, or a family economic safety net that kind of subsidizes that career. And it's hard to break out of that cycle for even gender diversity in our sector of
yeah.
and the nursing profession went through this too before it started to change. I think that's a good parallel. You work in healthcare, so you get it, that
Yeah.
it's low paid, so
Yeah.
women with some sort of other economic safety net doesn't take it, and then it's the cycle of like, it's women, we pay them less, but it's done by women, but we pay them less, but it's done by women, but we pay them less, and
Yeah.
it's like,
And
let's
to
bust
be
out
a
of that. Yeah,
charitable sector, I mean, is really
exactly. Yeah.
look at, I mean, not only are there, cultural and racial norms, there's, I mean, the whole history of colonialism, at
Yep.
least in America, around
Yep.
these things. And years ago, I talked about leaders of volunteers being the kind of canary in the coal mines of organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's becoming, for me, it resonates more and more. And I would say that um, by not unpacking and acknowledging that that we have that role, that we have that sometimes, it can be a privilege, but it's also a responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
um, to not only, call out what we're seeing in our organizations and how that intersects with community, but also our own selves.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I mean, so much of the challenges that I think we face, and the mental and
Mm-hmm.
perceived limitations that we face as a profession are
Right.
gender limitations. I mean,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
And but also, because we've, just been a gang of white middle class women for so long,
Yeah.
like, even I think about, what would have happened if 30 years ago, instead of aligning ourselves with human resources,
Yeah.
aligned ourselves with, more on the philanthropy side, like, like
Mm-hmm. And
leadership giving.
funders. Yeah. Yeah.
Totally different. I mean, again, still we would still face, similar issues,
Mm-hmm.
because of who's been in the profession. But I do think it starts actually challenging us, if we think about who's purely in the profession.
Right.
That's like one thing. But if we start to expand it, and in conversations I've been having with peers, they've really helped me to challenge the thinking of like this distinguishment between what makes for a professional leader of volunteers versus a lot of the volunteer led, right? and
Yeah.
and there is an interesting kind of I would say contradiction in, I think, how a lot of us, or I'll own it, like how I have
Mm-hmm.
often thought about it, in terms of, we say that, volunteer is just a pay grade. We say that, volunteering doesn't mean that you're any less capable of doing things. And yet we do create these
Mm-hmm.
false dynamics and diversions, or divisions, pardon me, between us who do like professional leading volunteers versus volunteer groups. And I think what you see, and certainly actually when I was doing research earlier last year around the impacts of COVID on leaders of volunteers, what I actually saw was people who were unpaid leaders of volunteers, or at much smaller organizations, actually tended to be, I didn't ask about diversity and things like that, but
Mm-hmm.
they actually tended to be at the table more and very much part of those conversations. And so I think, we really need to look at how are some of these new volunteer led organizations and groups forming themselves from a power dynamic, from a structural dynamic,
Mm-hmm.
and what can we learn from them? Because the new CVA textbook is out, and I have a
Mm-hmm.
whole part in the introductory chapter about the volunteer disruption economy, right? And how we're really because of our stagnancy, we're, I think, becoming at risk of becoming irrelevant, because of tools like data and technology, where people can just go online and, oh, I'm just going to copy and paste these policies, and oh, look, here's a free scheduling tool. Boom, 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 boom. We don't need to pay anybody. We don't need to, do like really invest in having someone professional do this stuff. So I think it's very interesting how these things all intersect, because I think there is a lot more diversity in the work of volunteer leadership that's being done. And I think there's opportunities for us to learn from and evolve from that. Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
it's
No,
to me,
that's great.
it's a bit of a Gordian knot, and I haven't completely unpacked it and unraveled it, but I think it's fascinating, and I think we need to really critically examine these things and get uncomfortable, because we're going to be poor, and I mean poor in the sense of, like, if our goal is to engage people, we're going to be less effective at that,
Right.
more and more over time.
And that I agree with all of that. And it's, it's not the kind of Gordian knot you can just slice your sword through like some demigod superhero. It is more complicated, and it needs to be acknowledged that it's more complicated. And as much as, we can do in 45 minutes or of an hour chatting. And also I'm constantly kind of putting the disclaimer on the Tuesday tip segments that, these are a few minutes to get you thinking about some ideas or a few quick tips. And here's a lot more resources to do the deep dive if you want to do that on this topic. Like 5 to 10 minutes cannot cover any one subject. It can just start the sparks and the seeds of doing that.
It's Pandora's box. We're cracking her open. And I would say, just by virtue of the complexity and importance of these issues, it's not, it's like saying, like, oh, well, we can solve the world's problems by signing this petition or by liking this post, right? Like
nope.
if social change and improving the world was that easy, we then we wouldn't have needed the early 2010s, right? It would have been like, boom.
Yep, we're all set. Yeah, we would still be on MySpace and Friendster. That whole thing. And I think it also speaks to, you and I have been chanting this chant, and Rob and others over the years, of the holistic, non-siloed, not fragmented, but this holistic approach of getting rid of, Jerome's talked a lot about this too, of acknowledging that, at least, and probably more in 2020, but at least 70% of volunteering around the world is informal, mutual aid, may not even recognize themselves as volunteers, might be organized as, again, community, neighborhood by neighborhood, or regional mutual aid. Not worried about counting hours, just like shifts are filled, work gets done, but like we have no one to report data to, and nobody cares, so we'd rather just spend the time getting the work done. And acknowledging, I also had conversations earlier this week about this, if you remember the Dr. Seuss book, The Star-Bellied Sneetches, of just, having a slight difference in, like, well, I've got a star in my belly and you don't, and that otherness of, okay, training versus experience. And someone can, do a semester or 2-year degree or get a master's degree and be very, very, academic and very knowledgeable in that sense, and never have themselves run a volunteer program. And have zero experience points and a lot of spell points, spell skill level or feat points. And the other way that we don't have to try to colonialize or take over mutual aid groups, but we can still partner with them and then not worry about what they're doing with their data or their records or who's counting whose hours, because I think that's a form of, that's a dominant programming in our culture, is like, oh, they're not doing it right. With my perspective, I can do this, versus really opening up our minds and opening up the opportunities to learn from each other. Because I can tell you, the nitty gritty stuff on the ground has solved for a problem that someone has had 7 meetings about in a boardroom, and it just keeps having meetings about meetings about meetings, and someone's like, oh, no red tape, no reporting up, no getting permission, we just realized it works better when we do this.
And you know, and it's really fascinating because I think there is, I mean, and certainly we've seen the pendulum swing around the professionalization of the sector and of volunteerism. You know, and I think what we're seeing right now with a lot of the disruption economies is just a frustration, and I would say in community engagement general, with a frustration with all of the what seems to be unnecessary formalization or just like crap of, you know, well, you have to fill out this form, and oh, now, no, but you didn't fill out
Yeah,
forms
you didn't cross this T. This
A
box
and
is still empty. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
You know,
Hmm.
and I think, and I also think there's an arrogance in presuming that there is not space for both,
Right.
right?
There is space for both.
You
Yeah.
know, and I, you know, and again, that's for me when I talk about us being like canaries in the coal mine. That's a big part of the responsibility we have is talking about, you know, here's where it's non-negotiable around people's safety and
Right.
well-being,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't matter how formal or informal you are, like
Yeah.
these are non-negotiables. These are the values, you
Hmm.
know, that are inherent to any type of people connecting,
Right.
right?
Right.
And it doesn't matter if you've, you know, if you've got your volunteer management certificate or CVA or, you know, or a master's degree. Like I have a
Hmm.
master's degree. I have zero life skills. Ask anybody in my family. Like it's an embarrassment, right? But I think it's, you know, it's becoming more open to the multiplicity of those perspectives
Hmm.
and the value that all of us can bring,
Hmm.
um, you know, based on the, I mean, again, to me it's just fascinating, this contradiction, because we talk about the value of having such a diverse pool of volunteers in our organizations and how much strength that brings, and yet we haven't really reconciled with the fact that we ourselves are so homogeneous,
Right.
and all of the issues and concerns and problems and limitations that that can bring.
Exactly. And just it does take it takes discomfort. It takes courage. It takes curiosity to be open to learning from other people. And again, it's that delicate balance of advocacy of we know that we are professionals, that we are the experts in this, that if we are working within a formal organization, that we should be advised as leaders and volunteers as the in-house experts versus someone in a, you know, an accounting, I'm going to pick on accountants today, but accounting department saying, well, this line item, you know, we need to save $50,000 a year, and the cost of this whole program altogether is that. So let's just black that out and not talk about it, or ask the people, or you know what ripple effect. And again, that kind of siloed, fragmented thinking about it. But it's also important to understand that there's times where I know this is hard to believe. Try not to laugh out loud. There's times where I do shut the hell up and get out of the conversation because it's not for me to say.
Yeah.
It's not my lane. It's not my place. And there, in certain conversations, there's been too much white noise,
Yeah.
and I am sure as hell not going to add to it unless someone, you know, asks me a direct question, and then I'll
Yeah.
push back in that.
And that's what I'm talking about with, you know, the responsibility, like, and the sacrifice of leadership is, even if it's not our perspective, because of the nature of our work with, you know, diverse people, it behooves us, it is our responsibility as leaders
Hmm.
to, you know, we can't, I will never know your experience,
Hmm.
that is okay, but I need
Right.
to be respectful enough and to do the work to acknowledge that we have different experiences. You know, I will never um, know the experience of living in non-white skin and
Hmm.
non-constant privilege.
Yep.
um, that it's not, and I love how FISA, I've, you know,
Yep. Price is great.
FISA talks about it. It's not about apologizing. It's acknowledging and
Hmm.
then really thinking about um, active allyship in terms of what can I do to not add to it, and
Right.
to really, you know, ask those again, and going back to uncomfortableness, right?
Hmm.
Like it may be starting with me just being really uncomfortable about what have I done in, you know, what have I designed in terms of, you know, my volunteer engagement practice that's actually unintentionally reinforcing, or
Or
supporting.
inaccessible, or putting up barriers of
Exactly.
bias.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I years and years ago, I had some diversity training, and the instructor said something that's always stayed with me, which is, feeling sorry is a really useless, like feeling
Yeah.
guilt is a really useless emotion, because it's non-active, right? And
Hmm.
it can just swallow you whole. And so this isn't, the uncomfortableness that I'm talking about isn't about feeling guilt.
Hmm.
It's really just about, I would say, um, it's about acknowledgement. It's about critical examination. It's about just, like Maya Angelou says, knowing better and doing better,
Right.
right? And
Right.
I think we're starting, people are, yeah, although I think a lot of it unfortunately has been very performative.
Yeah.
um, I think it has opened up people's eyes a crack,
Hmm.
in saying, oh, wow, I really am, like I really am privileged. And what I hope, and that's why being uncomfortable is kind of my top tip for leaders and volunteers right now, knowing the demographics of our profession.
Hmm.
We have a tremendous opportunity because of the demographics we tend to represent, but also because of the nature of our work. We can be really, really important change agents in our communities. But we need to do the work. We need to
Yep.
get uncomfortable. We need to really critically examine. Nobody wants to say, I'm a racist. Nobody wants to say, I've done racist things. But the reality is, you have.
You have.
As a
Yeah.
white person, you
Yeah.
have, and you do.
Yeah.
And that's, you know that's something that, because we're so nice.
Yeah.
And
Especially in Canada, but kind of
yeah,
waspy white Anglo-Saxon culture in general, waspy culture in general can be, um, it's again, that's that gaslighting politeness surface thing that's a
yeah,
deep in the United States of America, that puritanical colonialist
yeah,
enculturation that's multi-generational, but then somehow you all became even more polite, like
yeah.
we're and sorry and
And boot, right?
a boot. I'm sorry about the harm I've done.
Yes, I'm sorry about being, yeah, so I think it's, and Canadians love, like, we love to pretend that Americans are the only ones with a race problem, right?
Nope. Nope.
This moral superiority, and it's bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think, we need to get uncomfortable, on a lot of things, but that would be one of the most critical things that we can do.
Hmm.
Like I said, not just because of the demographics that we tend to represent overwhelmingly, but also because of the nature of our work in community organizations.
Yeah, totally. Erin, thank you so much for taking time for priceless advice and your wonderful Tuesday tips. Any parting words of wisdom for our other leaders of volunteers watching?
No, I would just say, I tend to come across as all the things that we're not doing enough of. I'm a little chicken little kind of thing, but I think it's really because I see so much potential. I see so much potential in our profession. There's so many amazing, truly exceptional, talented people, who are passionate, who care, who really want, to do the right thing and do the right thing. So I would say, like, just, take comfort and pride in that, and just know that as far as we've come, there's still, so much ahead of us, and if only we do the work.
Yep, if only we do the work. And when we need to take a nap from doing the work,
Yeah.
especially on weekends, because it's been really extra hard work. Well, I'm delighted to see you even in a virtual way.
Ooh.
Very, very max headroom, very high touch, high touch.
You know how much that dates us, right?
You know what? I am out and proud Gen X. I am right there with Reality Bites, and
Yeah.
that's fine by me. And Erin, love big hugs to your dog, and
And McNabb. Yep.
Thank you so much. And we will hopefully see you in person where we can hug and giggle and be extremely silly
Yeah.
and carry on shenanigans in whatever city we happen to be in at the time in the future
I will
times.
look
And
forward to that day. We just all have to hold on to that and know
hold
that it's coming.
hold on to the dream.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for having me. This was fun.
Absolutely.